Staring across the dinner table at my brother and his new fiancée, a chilling realization washed over me. This was the exact night he first introduced her, years before I would die on a freezing prison floor, framed for a massive fraud just to protect him from her greed. But having opened my eyes to a second chance, I made a new choice. I won't say a single word. I'll simply sit back and let her destroy him. The first thing that hit me was the smell of roasted duck and expensive Pinot Noir. Then came the ambient hum of polite conversation, the clinking of crystal glasses, and the warm amber glow of the chandeliers at the Wellington, Chicago's most pretentious and overpriced steakhouse. I blinked, my lungs expanding in a sharp, desperate gasp. A second ago, I had been lying on the concrete floor of a county lockup. I remembered the agonizing tightness in my chest, my asthma inhaler deliberately kicked out of reach by a guard who had been paid to look the other way. I remembered the utter despair of dying at 27, disowned by my family, branded an embezzler, and entirely alone. Sophie, are you even listening to me? The voice snapped my head up. Sitting across from me was Derek, my older brother. He was alive, looking incredibly smug, and wearing that hideous bespoke navy suit he only wore when he wanted to impress someone. Next to him sat Savannah Reed. I stared at her, my blood running cold, then instantly boiling. She looked exactly as she had the first time we met. Spun gold blonde hair, wide doe eyes that practically screamed innocence, and a demure, rehearsed smile. Around her wrist hung a Cartier love bracelet. In my past life, I had made the fatal mistake of pointing out that the screws on the bracelet were slightly misaligned, a dead giveaway of a high-tier counterfeit. I had demanded to know how a 24-year-old freelance graphic designer afforded it. That one comment had started the war. Derek had called me a jealous, bitter bitch. My parents had scolded my lack of manners. And Savannah had begun her quiet, methodical campaign to destroy my life, eventually framing me for the theft of $500,000 from Derek's company. But this wasn't the county lockup. It was October 14th, 2024, 18 months before my death. The universe, in all its twisted glory, had hit the rewind button. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice dripping with honey, shocking even myself with how steady it sounded. I spaced out for a second. I was just admiring Savannah's bracelet. It's absolutely stunning. Derek's defensive posture instantly relaxed. The aggressive retort he had been preparing melted into a proud grin. Savannah's eyes narrowed for a fraction of a second, a predator detecting an anomaly in its prey, before returning to her sweet facade. "Thank you so much, Sophie," Savannah practically cooed. "Derek got it for me for our 3-month anniversary. He spoils me rotten." 3 months. They had known each other for 90 days, and he was already buying her fake luxury jewelry and introducing her to the family. In my previous life, I had spent the rest of this dinner interrogating her, poking holes in her contradictory backstory about growing up as a poor orphan in Ohio. This time, I played the perfect adoring sister. I laughed at her painfully unfunny jokes. I passed the breadbasket with a warm smile. When she launched into her rehearsed sob story about her tragically deceased parents, instead of rolling my eyes, I offered her a silk tissue from my purse and reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "You are so incredibly strong, Savannah," I murmured, staring directly into her lying eyes. Derek is lucky to have found someone with such resilience. By the time the check came, Derek was beaming at me. My parents, Patricia and Robert, who had always favored my brother, looked at me with approving smiles. I had passed the test. I was the good, supportive little sister. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. I didn't try to hack into Derek's servers like I had before. I didn't hire a sloppy private investigator to tail Savannah through the city streets. I knew how this game ended, and I knew exactly how to protect myself. My grandfather had left a trust fund, split equally between Derek and me. It was structured so that at age 25, we gained full control of the assets. I was 26. In my past life, my parents had guilt-tripped me into using my half of the trust as collateral to bail Derek out when Savannah's investments inevitably went south. When the entire house of cards collapsed, the bank seized my money. At 9 a.m. sharp, I walked into the downtown branch of First National Bank. "I need to liquidate my entire trust," I told the wealth manager, a balding man named Mr. Henderson, who had known my family for decades. "Sophie, that's $1.2 million, he said, adjusting his glasses. "Are you sure? Your father usually likes to be consulted on, "The trust is solely in my name, Mr. Henderson," I interrupted smoothly but firmly. "I'm moving it to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands under a newly formed LLC. Here is the routing information. I also need to place a hard freeze on my credit, and I want to officially remove myself as a secondary guarantor on Simmons Freight's line of credit." It took 3 hours of paperwork, but by noon I was completely untethered from the Simmons family's financial ship. Let it sink. I was already in the lifeboat. The parasite truly began to feed 3 weeks later at a Sunday family barbecue. The weather was crisp, the leaves turning brilliant shades of orange in my parents' sprawling backyard. I walked inside to grab another bottle of Pinot Grigio and found Savannah crying softly in the guest bathroom. Derek was pacing the hallway outside, his hands buried in his hair, playing the role of the stressed, capable hero. "What's wrong?" I asked, putting on my best face of sisterly concern. Derek sighed heavily. "Savannah's uncle. He's a real estate developer in Dubai. He just had a massive stroke, and the bank is threatening to foreclose on his luxury condo project because he missed a crucial permitting payment. She's devastated. If they lose the project, her whole family is ruined." I had to bite the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood to keep from bursting into laughter. The Dubai luxury condo. It was so aggressively textbook. It was the exact same script she used last time. In my past life, this was the exact moment I had lost my mind. I had pulled out my phone, furiously Googling overseas real estate scams, screaming at Derek that he was being played by a classic pig-butchering syndicate. I had warned him that the uncle didn't exist. Derek had practically shoved me into the wall, telling me I was dead to him. Now I stepped forward and placed a comforting, gentle hand on his shoulder. "Derek, that's terrible," I whispered softly. "Is there anything you can do? You've always been so brilliant at business. Surely you could look at the prospectus. Maybe this isn't just a tragedy, but a real investment opportunity for Simmons Freight." Derek's eyes lit up. The ego stroke worked like black magic. The man had a savior complex the size of Manhattan and the business acumen of a distracted toddler. A lethal combination Savannah was built to exploit. "You know, I hadn't thought of that," Derek muttered, standing up straighter. "It could be an incredible tax write-off or a short-term bridge loan with massive ROI. I'll ask her for the documents." "You're a good man, Derek," I said, handing him a glass of water. "Go be there for her." I watched him walk into the bathroom to comfort the viper, fully aware he was stepping directly into her jaws. By December, Derek was entirely consumed by the scam. He had secretly wired $500,000 of Simmons Freight's operating capital to an untraceable corporate account in Cyprus, supposedly to secure the deed for the Dubai condos. But a scammer is never satisfied. They drain the host until the heart stops beating. Savannah needed more. We were gathered in our parents' living room a week before Christmas. The fireplace was crackling happily. Mum was knitting a scarf, and Dad was reading the Wall Street Journal. Derek looked pale, exhausted, and desperate. Savannah sat beside him, clutching his arm like a frightened child. "Dad," Derek said, his voice cracking slightly, "I need a massive favor. The Dubai project is stalled. The local municipal government is demanding a $300,000 environmental permitting fee by Friday. If we don't pay it, the state seizes the property and I lose the initial $500,000 I invested." Robert lowered his paper. Patricia stopped her knitting needles mid-stitch. $300,000? Dad asked, his brow furrowing deeply. "Derek, that's a massive amount of liquid cash. Everything I have is tied up in retirement funds. To get that kind of money by Friday, I'd have to take out a second mortgage on this house. In my previous life, I had thrown myself physically between them. I had begged my father on my knees, crying hysterically, pleading with him not to sign away his home. I told him Derek was being conned, that Savannah was a phantom. Dad had slapped me across the face for disrespecting my brother's business acumen and ruining the family peace. This time, I remained perfectly still on the velvet sofa, calmly sipping my Merlot. Dad looked over at me, clearly conflicted. "Sophie, what do you think? You have your MBA. Does this sound right to you?" I offered him a warm, reassuring smile. "Dad, Derek grew Simmons Freight by 20% last year. He's a brilliant CEO. Plus, Savannah is going to be family soon, and family helps family, right? If Derek says the return on investment is guaranteed, who are we to doubt him?" Derek shot me a look of such profound gratitude, I almost gagged. "Exactly, Dad," he pleaded. "Sophie gets it. I've run the numbers 100 times. I'll pay you back with a 10% interest bonus in exactly 6 months. My father exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples, before nodding. "All right, son. I'll call the bank first thing tomorrow morning." I took another long, slow sip of my wine. It tasted like absolute victory. I knew for a fact the house would go into foreclosure in exactly 14 months. The wedding planning ramped up with alarming speed. Savannah claimed her dying uncle needed to see her married before he passed away, demanding a highly publicized, lavish $150,000 destination wedding in Lake Como, Italy. Derek, utterly strapped for cash because all his business liquidity was tied up in the fake Dubai condos, quietly took out high-interest, predatory business loans to fund the extravaganza. The night before our flight to Italy, I sat in my penthouse apartment with Arthur Davies. Arthur was a discreet, terrifyingly efficient high-end private investigator I had hired a month prior. He wasn't cheap. His retainer was $25,000. But my Cayman LLC paid him without a second thought. He slid a thick manila folder across my marble kitchen island. "You were right on the money, Ms. Simmons," Arthur grunted, his gravelly voice echoing in the quiet room. He took a slow sip of his black coffee. "Savannah Reed doesn't exist. Her real name is Kelsey Miller. She's got active warrants in Texas and Nevada for wire fraud and extortion. The uncle in Dubai, that's her ex-husband, Trent Miller. He's currently sitting in a rented penthouse in Miami, managing the offshore crypto wallets where every dime of your brother's money is being funneled." I casually flipped open the folder. High-resolution photographs stared back at me. Savannah and Trent making out on a rented yacht in Miami, while Derek was back in Chicago sweating over his ledgers. Bank statements showing the Cyprus account routing directly into Trent's crypto exchanges. IP addresses. Text logs. It was the Holy Grail. With this folder, I could walk into the FBI field office right now. I could stop the wedding. I could save my parents' house. I could save my brother's company. I closed the folder, tapped it lightly on the marble counter, and walked over to a biometric wall safe hidden behind a painting. I placed the folder inside and locked it. "Thank you, Arthur," I said, turning back to him. "Continue monitoring them. Document every single wire transfer, but under no circumstances do you intervene." "You're not going to warn him?" Arthur asked, raising an eyebrow. For a man who had seen the darkest corners of human nature, he actually looked mildly surprised. "Warn him?" I chuckled, a cold, hollow sound that barely recognized as my own. Why on earth would I ruin a perfectly good wedding? 2 days later, I stood on a breathtaking terrace overlooking the sapphire waters of Lake Como. I was strapped into a hideous peach bridesmaid dress, holding a bouquet of imported orchids. The sun was shining. A string quartet was playing Vivaldi. I watched my brother, tears of pure joy in his eyes, pledge his life, his assets, and his future to a parasite. There was no prenuptial agreement. Weeks earlier, I had made sure to subtly suggest to Derek that prenups ruined the romance and showed a complete lack of faith in a marriage. He, desperate to prove his devotion to Savannah, had agreed wholeheartedly. "You may kiss the bride," the officiant declared. As they kissed, the wealthy crowd erupted into cheers. My mother wept tears of joy, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. My father clapped Derek on the back, completely unaware he had just financed his own bankruptcy. I stood in the front row, a perfect, serene smile plastered across my face. I raised my crystal glass of champagne toward the happy couple. "Drink up, brother," I thought, taking a sip as the bubbles danced on my tongue. "The real nightmare is just beginning." The honeymoon phase lasted exactly 4 months before the rot began to show. By the spring of 2025, the lavish family dinners at the Wellington had been replaced by tense, quiet gatherings at my parents' house. Derek no longer wore his bespoke navy suits. He showed up in wrinkled button-downs, dark circles bruised beneath his eyes, constantly checking his phone with the frantic, twitchy energy of an addict. Savannah, on the other hand, had never looked better. She had upgraded her counterfeit Cartier for the real deal, funded entirely by Derek's dwindling lines of credit. But her sweet, demure mask was beginning to slip. She was frequently absent from family events, claiming she was traveling for high-end graphic design symposiums. I knew, thanks to the weekly reports Arthur, the PI, delivered to my penthouse, that these symposiums were actually weekend benders in Miami with Trent, her dying uncle and actual ex-husband. The breaking point arrived on a rainy Tuesday in late October. I was sitting in my parents' kitchen, sipping a cup of Earl Grey tea, when Derek burst through the back door. He was soaked to the bone, his chest heaving, his face pale as a ghost. "Dad," he gasped, ignoring me entirely. "Dad, I need help. I need help right now." Robert walked in from the living room, his own face lined with the stress of the massive second mortgage he had taken out to fund Derek's phantom Dubai project. "What is it, Derek? What's wrong?" "The local municipality in Dubai," Derek stammered, running a trembling hand through his wet hair. "They enacted a new foreign investor tax. They're demanding another $400,000 by Friday, or they're seizing the entire condo development. Everything we put in, the initial $500,000, the $300,000 you lent me, it will all be gone, wiped out. Wiped. My father gripped the edge of the kitchen island, his knuckles turning white. Derek, I don't have it. You know I don't. The bank won't extend me another dime. My retirement accounts are drained. I'm driving an Uber on the weekends just to make the new mortgage payments. You don't understand, Derek screamed, his voice cracking with pure panic. If this project fails, Simmons Freight goes under. I leveraged the company's operating accounts. I can't make payroll next month. Savannah is in tears. She says her uncle is threatening to cut her out of the family if we lose this. I took a slow, calculated sip of my tea, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. It was intoxicating. In my past life, this was the exact moment Savannah had suggested, with wide, innocent eyes, that Derek borrow money from Simmons Freight's client escrow accounts to bridge the gap. When the auditors had discovered the missing funds, Savannah had planted the IP addresses and forged signatures on my computer. I was the financial officer. I had taken the fall. Sophie, Derek pleaded, suddenly turning his desperate gaze toward me. Sophie, you liquidated your trust. You have $1 million sitting around. Please, I'll give you a 30% equity stake in Simmons Freight. I'll pay you double in a year. Please, you have to save us. I looked at my brother. I looked at the man who, in another timeline, had stood in a courtroom and testified that I was a jealous, greedy sister who stole from him. I looked at the parents who had nodded along with him. Oh, Derek, I sighed, my voice dripping with perfect fabricated sympathy. I am so incredibly sorry. I can't. What do you mean you can't? My father snapped, his old favoritism flaring up. Your brother is drowning, Sophie. I locked the entire trust into a 10-year, high-yield, non-liquid overseas bond. I lied smoothly, staring directly into my father's angry eyes. If I withdraw it now, the penalties would wipe out the principal entirely. It's inaccessible. I literally do not have the cash. Derek collapsed into a kitchen chair, burying his face in his hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The great CEO, the golden boy, reduced to a puddle of tears over a mirage in the desert. 2 days later, Savannah made her final, fatal move. Arthur sent me an encrypted message at 2 a.m. The wire just went through. He did it. Derek, pushed to the absolute brink by Savannah's psychological manipulation and the terror of losing his company, had illegally transferred $650,000 from Simmons Freight's client escrow accounts directly into the Cyprus corporate account. He had committed a massive federal crime. The parasite had taken the last drop of blood. It was time for her to detach. Within 24 hours, Savannah filed a restraining order against Derek, claiming he had become erratic, abusive, and financially controlling due to his failing business. She packed her bags and vanished from their shared luxury apartment, leaving behind nothing but an empty walk-in closet and a handwritten note saying she was fleeing for her own safety. Derek was entirely broken. But the true nightmare hadn't even knocked on his door yet. The FBI raided Simmons Freight on a freezing Monday morning in November. I made sure I was parked across the street in my tinted Range Rover, sipping a vanilla latte as the black SUVs swarmed the corporate office. Agents in tactical windbreakers poured into the building, carrying empty cardboard boxes. 20 minutes later, they walked out with hard drives, ledgers, and my brother. Derek was in handcuffs. His face was a mask of absolute catatonic shock. He looked around wildly, as if expecting Savannah to suddenly appear from the crowd of onlookers to explain that this was all a big misunderstanding. I rolled down my window just a fraction, letting the crisp winter air hit my face. I watched him get shoved into the back of a federal vehicle. No asthma attack. No cold concrete floor. No one to take the bullet for him. My phone started buzzing violently. It was my mother. I ignored it, started the engine, and drove back to my penthouse. When I finally let my parents up to my apartment that evening, they looked like they had aged 20 years. My mother's eyes were swollen shut from crying. My father was physically shaking. "They arrested him, Sophie," Patricia wailed, collapsing onto my velvet sofa. "They said he stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from his clients. They said he wired it to offshore accounts. The bank just called your father. They're accelerating the foreclosure on our house because the mortgage payments bounced. We've lost everything." "Where is Savannah?" my father demanded, his voice hollow. "We can't reach her. Her phone is disconnected. Derek needs his wife." I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the glittering skyline of Chicago. Then, I walked over to the painting on the wall, swung it open, and pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner of my safe. I pulled out the thick manila folder and dropped it onto the glass coffee table with a heavy, satisfying thud. "Savannah isn't coming, Dad," I said, my voice entirely stripped of the warm, sisterly tone I had faked for a year and a half. "Her real name is Kelsey Miller. She's a professional con artist." My parents stared at the folder, then at me, uncomprehending. "Open it," I commanded. Trembling, my father reached out and flipped the cover open. The high-resolution photos of Savannah and Trent kissing on the Miami yacht spilled out. Bank statements detailing exactly how Derek's and my father's money had been funneled into untraceable crypto wallets owned by her ex-husband. Criminal records from Texas and Nevada. What is this?" my mother gasped, pressing a hand to her mouth. "It's the truth," I said coldly. "I've had this information for over a year. I hired a private investigator the week after Derek introduced her to us." My father stood up, his face flashing from horror to blind rage. "You knew. You knew she was a criminal, and you let Derek marry her. You let me mortgage my home for her." "Yes," I replied, not blinking, not backing down. "I did." "Why?" he roared, stepping toward me. "Because if I had told you," I said, my voice dropping to a lethal, icy whisper, "you would have called me a jealous, bitter bitch. You would have told me I was trying to ruin my brother's happiness. Derek would have alienated me, and you would have taken his side. You always took his side." I stepped closer to my father, refusing to let him intimidate me. "You didn't respect me enough to believe me when it mattered, so I decided to let Derek be the genius businessman you always claimed he was." "But Savannah," my father whispered, tears finally spilling down his cheeks. "She has all the money. She won." I smiled, a genuine, terrifying smile. "No, Dad, she didn't." I walked over to the kitchen island and pulled out a second folder. You see, Savannah and Trent thought they were brilliant. They thought they had laundered the money perfectly through decentralized crypto exchanges. But Arthur is very, very good at his job, and the FBI's cybercrimes division is even better. 3 hours ago, while Derek was being processed in a federal holding cell, Kelsey Miller and Trent Miller were sitting in the first-class lounge at Miami International Airport, waiting to board a one-way flight to the Maldives. They never made it to the gate. I had anonymously mailed Arthur's entire dossier, complete with decrypted hard drive copies of Trent's crypto ledgers, directly to the lead federal prosecutor in Miami a week prior. I had timed it perfectly. They were arrested at 3 p.m. today, I told my parents, watching the shock ripple across their faces. The Fed seized their cold storage crypto wallets. The money is frozen. It will take years of litigation, but the clients Derek stole from will eventually get their money back. Savannah is looking at 20 years in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud, extortion, and money laundering. And Derek, my mother pleaded, looking up with a desperate glimmer of hope. If Savannah is arrested, then Derek is a victim. They'll let him go. Derek forged the signatures on the escrow accounts, Mom, I said flatly, shattering her delusion. He committed federal bank fraud to cover his own bad investments. He might get a reduced sentence for cooperating against Savannah, but he is going to prison. Simmons Freight is completely bankrupt. Silence descended on the penthouse. The only sound was the distant wail of a police siren far below on the city streets. We have nowhere to go, my father said softly, staring at the floor. The house goes to auction next month. We're homeless, Sophie. I looked at the two people who had raised me, the people who had blindly enabled the brother who, in another life, had watched me die in a cage. I felt no pity. I felt only the profound, settling peace of absolute control. You're not homeless, I said quietly. I slid a final sheet of paper across the table. It was a property deed. I bought the debt on your house through my offshore LLC, I explained, watching their eyes widen in disbelief. I own the property now. You can continue living there, rent-free. But the deed remains in my name. I didn't stop there. Furthermore, Simmons Freight's physical assets, the trucks, the warehouse leases, the routing software, are being liquidated by the bankruptcy court. My LLC is purchasing them for pennies on the dollar tomorrow morning. I am rebranding it. I am the sole owner. My father stared at me as if he were looking at a stranger. In a way, he was. The daughter they knew had died on a concrete floor. The woman standing before them was entirely immune to their manipulation. I saved the family, Dad, I said, my voice echoing in the vast, luxurious space of my penthouse. I just did it on my own terms. I turned away from them, walking back to the floor-to-ceiling windows. I watched the city lights flicker like a million tiny stars. A vast empire waiting to be built. My brother was sitting in a cell. Savannah was in chains. My parents lived under my roof. I had hit the rewind button, and this time I had written a flawless script. And that is how I rewrote my destiny. I learned that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting toxic people destroy themselves. What would you do if you were given a second chance at life? Would you warn a family that betrayed you, or would you sit back and let karma take the wheel? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe to the channel for more insane revenge stories.